Okay. I want to thank everybody for coming to the DevOps Live meetup. Today we have Jay from G2, G3, and he's going to be presenting us Walt Disney Chronological Frozen. DevOps is all about technology integration and other urban legends. Okay. And I wanted to make one small announcement for those of you that are new here. In September, we're organizing DevOps Days Dallas. It's going to be at the Grapevine Convention Center, and it's going to be September 15 and 16. So you can follow us on Twitter at DevOps Days DFW, and you can get all the information there. Thank you.
Thanks, man. All right, well, thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight. Just a quick word about my company before I go into the presentation to kind of tease up why I'm talking about some of these things here. My company is focused on engaging people. We do a lot of technology transformations for organizations. We do process development and all the mundane stuff that goes along with that, but we do a lot of human engagement. And my presentation today is a little bit lighthearted. It's not meant to be a deep dive into DevOps concepts, but it's stories and myths and urban legends that we've heard out on the road when we work with our organizations and things that can potentially submarine your DevOps initiative. So we hear these things out there and they're not often true, but they're spoken about a lot. So as I go through this presentation, there's going to be some urban legends about DevOps and some other urban legends just to keep it lighthearted. Some of them might be true, some of them probably aren't true, but we'll see how it goes as we go through here. So the first one from the title of my slide deck says, Walt Disney is cryogenically frozen. So of the people that are here, how many of you have heard this and believe this to be true? A couple of you? So this has been going around for a long time, pretty much ever since Walt Disney died. But in fact, he's actually buried in Glendale, California. He was cremated after his death on November 11th, 1966, and buried at the Fort Lawn Cemetery in Glendale. However, before he died, I'm sorry?
It's kind of the opposite.
Exactly the opposite. It's a lot hotter than. But prior to his death, he was actually a very heavy smoker. Some people say up to 3 packs a day, and he got lung cancer, and it metastasized really quickly. But prior to his death, he was interested in becoming cryogenically frozen and contacted the company that did it and was going down the path to actually do it. But before he was able to get all the paperwork handled, he passed away, and his heirs were not interested in allowing that to happen, so they cremated him and buried him. And in fact, the first person to actually be cryogenically frozen was a psychology professor out of California, and he was frozen in January 12th, so it was really a couple of months, quite a few weeks after Walt Disney died. So that is indeed an urban legend, so for those of you keeping track. So the next one is DevOps allows developer access into production. So it's those operations guys are out, those evil developers. They just weren't trying to get their meaty fingers into my operations and production environment. And that's what we hear a lot of times. And normally it's coming from the opposite side of the house. They're always looking at protecting the environment for the right reasons. But in fact, this simply is not true. But some people really do believe it. And the reality is that this stems from a misunderstanding. Primarily the misunderstanding around continuous delivery, and really an irrational fear when it comes to continuous development. So what's the difference between continuous delivery and continuous development? Continuous delivery focuses on getting the code delivered to a production-like environment, almost like a staging environment, near production, as close to production as you can get without actually being in production. And a lot of times that stuff is set up automatically to happen, but then it stops and requires some manual effort to get into production. It's often always manually done because of security reasons or whatever the case is. But continuous development, while it does strive to deliver code automatically to production, it only happens after rigorous testing and always in a controlled manner. The difference here is that DevOps, one of the cornerstones of DevOps is the concept of continuous delivery, right? That's one of the things DevOps, anybody that's doing DevOps strives for continuous delivery. But pretty much universally, everyone says that the continuous development is an optional step where it makes sense. And it doesn't always make sense. There may be regulatory requirements. There are all kinds of things that keep you from being able to do a continuous development sort of situation. But the fact of the matter is that this is an argument that the detractors of DevOps will use to try to keep DevOps from gaining a foothold in most organizations. They spread fear, and in a lot of cases, people will listen to them. So this is something that you might want to try to get out ahead of and help people understand what the concepts are and what the benefits of doing a continuous delivery capability. And in addition to that, if it makes sense, continuous development. So the next one we have here is batteries stored in the refrigerator will last longer. How many of us believe this one? I can tell you I have batteries in my refrigerator. Anyone else? I'm the only one? Well, in fact, technically, yes. Batteries in a near frozen state will last longer, but really not enough to matter, especially when you're talking about the alkaline batteries that most people keep in their homes. At room temperature, an alkaline battery discharges about 2% per year, so they're a really stable battery. If you keep it at a freezing or near freezing temperature, you can increase that by 5% or a 0.1% reduction in the year-long lifetime of that battery at the freezing temperature. So yes, it will last longer, but not enough to really notice. But it is different for nickel metal hydride. So if you guys have cell phone batteries and other things that are NMH, they do self-charge or self-discharge a lot faster. They actually lose a few percent per day. And if you do put that in the freezer, you'll be able to retain about a 90% full charge for a full month. So yes, but probably not enough to really make a difference. But still, this is one of those things about myths and urban legends. Even though I know in my head that it doesn't help, I've always kept my batteries in my refrigerator, and they, for whatever reason, that's where they live. So it doesn't always have to make sense. And some of these other more important urban legends that we're talking about don't always have to make sense either. So you need to understand that and get out in front of some of these concepts that are out there. So this next one, DevOps means putting everybody on a single team, right? So we're going to build this DevOps team, and we're going to restructure the organization. We have a little Dilbert comic here. It says, I heard you got assigned on a dotted line to our boss, arch rival. Look on the bright side. Think of yourself as leading the exciting life of a secret double agent. Don't most double agents get captured and executed immediately? They wish it was immediate. So sometimes we feel like we're getting behind enemy lines, right? So the ops guys are coming into our development world, or in some cases, the dev guys are going into the ops world. So it sometimes feels like we're going behind enemy lines, and then some people actually believe that we're trying to restructure the organization. But in fact, DevOps doesn't always mean a reorg. Sometimes it does. Some organizations, when they've gotten down the path of DevOps, really do take this to a next level and create teams that manage products rather than projects. You know the difference between having a product focus versus a project focus. A project has a beginning and a definite end. And a product would be you supporting that product, whether it be from development or operations, throughout the life cycle that product from cradle to grave. And there are some organizations that have taken that step and restructured the organization to allow for that. But in fact, most people don't do that. Most people will create teams as required. So they'll pull some people from operations, some people from development, even some people from the business, and create their Scrum teams or whatever development cycles you guys are using. But regardless of how you have it set up, DevOps has some clear focus on some of the things about breaking down the silos that are normally built up between operations and development in the business. So DevOps stresses this concept of having a one-team culture. Even though you may be from different parts of the organization and you don't know each other very well, your Scrum team, you want to have that same one-team culture so that you're all part of this one piece of work that is trying to get the best out of whether it be development or operations. It promotes closer cooperation between all disciplines. It is, in fact, the individuals, right, the people that are in the organization that build the bridges between the teams, and it encourages having common success factors. Sometimes we let ourselves become enemies of people in our company because we're measured on different things than they're measured. So when you do get your teams together, when you do pull different people from different parts of the organization. You need to make sure that we all have a common goal. And sometimes those goals are best not reflective of our IT capabilities. Sometimes the goals should be related to what the business is trying to accomplish. And if we can get outside of our IT bubble and think about the business perspective, what is it that the business is trying to accomplish with this piece of application or this software that we're developing? And use that as a success factor for our team. Is it to get more customers to sign on to our capability? Is it to be able to make a higher profit versus the previous version of our application? Whatever it is that your business is trying to accomplish, see if there's any way to bring that goal into your team structure and allow that to be a measure of success of the team, rather than the length of the project or the uptime of the application or whatever the case the IT structure might normally measure an organization as. Because when people are pulling in the same direction, are actually trying to achieve the same goal, then it's easier to accomplish those goals. If you have disparate goals, it's like having a tug of war. You're trying to get one way or the other. But when you're all on one side pulling in the same direction, that's when you really make some improvements. All right, the kidney heist. How many people have heard of this? That the business traveler goes to Las Vegas, goes out for a night on the town, has a few drinks, maybe gets slipped a Mickey or something, and wakes up the next morning in his bathtub filled with ice, and a note on the wall that says you have to call 911 and his kidneys have been stolen. Has anybody heard that one?
Yeah, I heard all of that.
Yeah. What's did it happen to you? So how many of you believe it? You guys are a bunch of cynics. Come on. So in fact, this is a long-standing hoax. It started back in the 90s. It really hit it big on the internet in 97 when there was one of those email forwarded type of situations, whereas it gains a lot of traction in the email environment, but it actually dates back to earlier than that in 1991. There's some earlier examples of it, but it really got big in 97. It's hard to trace back some of these hoax to their official beginning because it's just so many times it's hard to really pinpoint the beginning, but some people actually believe that there was, but some people believe that this episode of Law and Order where this happened back in 91 is when it first aired, was the genesis of this hoax, and that's where it started to come from. And in fact, it was so widespread at one point that the National Kidney Foundation actually published this article and asked people who have actually had this happen to them to come forward. And to date, from 91 till today, nobody has actually showed up. So that pretty much disproves the myth. But on the other side of that coin, organ trafficking does occur. So some of that, people think about what happens in other countries, primarily you hear about this in India and China, that people are paid for kidneys and they sell those on the open market. Oftentimes it's usually poor people that get caught up in that scheme and aren't always paid a lot. And that sometimes leads credence to this hoax. But in the real world, nobody's actually had that particular situation handed to them. That's been proven anyway. So the next one, there's no need for operations people in product planning, right? It's great to have the ops people available, but we don't have to have them back when we're building requirements and the planning for the product. We know we need to shift left, but we don't have to go all the way to that, right? You guys have heard that one? Anyone believe it? So really, in fact, here, ops can be a huge help in the early stages. One of the things about having an operations person available, even when you're at the requirement stage, is to understand some of the pitfalls that happens in operations. When we're in development, we don't always know all the goings on in the operations world, and things change all the time. Whether it be from an operability standard, like we only support specific add-ons, we might be a version or two behind because of compatibility issues, or certain environments might be sunsetting in the near future. We don't always in development get the heads up on some of the stuff that the operations people just know instinctively because they're involved with this stuff all the time. So having those people involved at the early stages will help you avoid some of the pitfalls that you might not have found otherwise until later on in your project. Anything from, like I said, architecture, security standards is a big one, data modeling, and even capacity. We may find that we're developing something for an environment or a specific arena that doesn't allow for the increased capacity that we're looking for. So that might not change the way we develop, but it would absolutely allow the ops people to plan for that ahead of time and increase the capacity capabilities or whatever the case may be. And in addition to helping the development process, it helps the operations standpoint as well. When we allow them to be involved early, they can plan for the rollout as early as possible, rather than waiting till the last minute and letting a new product get released and we aren't prepared for it. So operations gains benefit as well as development. So getting them involved early helps you, and it helps the ops people as well. I should have asked this before, but how many people here are in the operations side of the house? There's one. Everybody else is a developer? Yeah? No?
Well, we support some operations.
Yeah.
For DevOps team.
But it's a DevOps team? Okay. Great. That's really great. So this one you hear a lot about. Penny drop from the Empire State Building will kill you if it hits you on the head. What do you guys think? Yeah or no? Exactly. So it's actually set up here just a second ago. So the reality is it's a simple math equation. It's terminal velocity. Flat object and a relatively lightweight object for surface area. And based on the size and the weight and the shape of that object, it has a relatively low terminal velocity. That means it will only continue to accelerate. Drag and the air resistance will cause it to slow down. And once those two things equalize, then it can't go any faster. And the reality is that a penny would reach terminal velocity at around 25 miles per hour, which is about the same as dropping it from about 50 feet in the air, which isn't really that much. And if it hit your head, it'd feel like you're getting flicked on the back of the head. It probably wouldn't hurt you all that much. And even in a vacuum, if we took air out of the equation, it's such a light object that it would only reach about 200 miles an hour, 208 to be exact. Probably damage your skull if it hits you, but it would not penetrate. So it's relatively unlikely that you'll get hurt by a falling penny. But on the other hand, if you're looking for something to worry about falling ballpoint pens. Just because of the way that they're structured, they have the ability to gain some aerodynamics by pointing straight down if they're weighted at the top. And they can go up to 200 miles per hour. And when they do hit, they have such a small area that the force in that small area is high enough that they've shown it penetrating wood boards and theoretically could penetrate your skull. But it's never happened. So if you want to worry about something, worry about that, but don't worry about it too much. And no throwing pens off the Empire State Building, just to test it. Or bullets, yeah. Okay, how about process? You can't be creative under too much process. Process is stifling. If I have too much process, it weighs me down. I can't be creative in this environment, so that's why process is a bad idea. Anybody get that argument? No? I get it all the time. When in organizations, I work with a lot of organizations, and people that aren't used to process, arguments that I get when we go in and help them develop new processes for the organizations. And it's usually from the development environment. Operations guys, for whatever reason, they're not as creative, but from the development environment, this is usually where this argument comes from.
It certainly can be true.
It can be true.
You mentioned limits on doing things because of restrictions, and accessing production from a regulatory standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
That's a regulatory process, and you can't, and it's restricting because you have to follow that process.
I think really the argument comes from people saying that not so much that they can't get into a production environment, but because they have to follow these processes, they're not able to be creative. And it reduces their creative juices and all the things that go along with that. But you're right, it can be limiting. Process can be limiting. It can even be creative limiting. I always tell my organizations that I work with that anything that can be done poorly, right? And that process is in that same arena. But if you do it right, it can be liberating. One of the big differences is the difference between process and bureaucracy. A poorly designed process becomes bureaucratic very quickly. And when all we're doing is trying to check the boxes that need to be checked, whether it makes sense or not. That's when bureaucracy starts to get ingrained. And that's when process starts to slow down the flow of creative process, right? So that's when we have a problem. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to circumvent the process. You should see that as an opportunity for improvement. Every process that organizations have are put in place for good reason, right? So it may be a noble cause in the beginning, and for some reason it's evolved into something that's become a monster, or maybe it wasn't designed well in the first place. But there's a good reason for it, for whatever the process is, whether it be change management or release management or any of the processes that are out there. The reason can help you process that works for everybody that's involved with that. And effort that working with the process owner, you can usually come to some common ground in an arena that would help them have the structure that they need, help them have the control that is required from either a regulatory standpoint or whatever the case is, but also allow you to work within that process without it becoming overly bureaucratic. But once the process is designed well, then it can actually become liberating, because then you know what needs to be done. You know, at this point when I go into release, I have to do these 3 steps, and I don't have to figure it out because it's already been figured out for me. When you in an arena without process, you have ad hoc type of situations, then you have to figure it out every single time. Every time you want to stand up a new test environment, you'd have to go out and try to figure out who it is you have to talk to, and they may do it or they may not do it. They may have requirements today that they didn't have yesterday. Because the process isn't well defined, it could be anything. And if you have to figure out every single time, then things could be lost, they could fall through the cracks, and it becomes a lot more of a headache rather than having something written down and followed and be consistent every time something needs to happen, right? Everybody on board with that? So this next one is DevOps is an all or nothing plan. Either you're doing DevOps or you're not. Agree? No? Well, some people say that. And the reality is that there is room for everyone in a DevOps world. So you don't have to have all of your projects going through an agile environment. Not all projects, not all technologies can support an agile environment. So most organizations, unless they're very young organizations or very small organizations, have technology that can't handle an agile environment, whether it be from a mainframe perspective, that type of technology, or some other regulatory issue. There's almost always in every organization of sufficient size and of sufficient age that they can't do agile in that environment. And basically, what we're trying to say here is that there's room for everybody. The reality is you're going to have some projects that are going to be agile and some projects that aren't. But you need to have processes that allow for both modes of transportation. And Gartner coined this term bimodal IT that really kind of describes this from their perspective. And it's really, to me, I put this picture of this sign up here of a freeway. Anybody that's driven in California or Colorado know when you go over mountain passes, they have lanes that are specifically for trucks. They're not allowed to go in the other left-hand lanes. They have to stay in the right-hand lane because they're slower moving when they go up hills for safety reasons. But they've managed to allow for traffic to flow as quickly as possible, regardless of whether you're a truck or a car, by making sure that the slow-moving traffic stays on this side and the faster-moving traffic stays on this side. And what we need to do in IT is figure out how do we do that for our projects, that some of them are going to be slower-moving, so we need to account for that. But some of them are going to be faster. They're going to be agile, and they're going to have different capabilities that our waterfall environments don't have. And the reality is you have to work with your process owners. And this usually comes to bear in change management, right? That's another one of those arguments where, you know, the development teams just want to circumvent change management. That's why they're talking about this DevOps stuff. But you don't have to circumvent it, but you do have to account for the different speeds of the projects that are going to be coming through. It doesn't make sense to allow trucks all of the lanes of the freeway when it just would slow down everybody. You want to make sure that there's room for everybody in your environment, whether they be slow moving or fast moving. And there are ways around that, especially, like I said, in change management. There's things that change managers have the ability to do, whether it be a pre-approved change for agile environments, as long as you prove that it doesn't create any sort of outages or any other unforeseen impacts. Those are things that are in the tool belt of most people use ITIL type processes in change management. ITIL talks about pre-approved changes. It's just that some change managers feel like they're being threatened by DevOps rather than embracing it, or Agile, whichever way you want to go with it. But they feel threatened by it rather than embracing it. They put up a roadblock and say, nope, we can't do that. This is my process. We're following it, regardless of what you guys are trying to do in the DevOps world. So the key here is to allow for projects to work at their own speed effectively and ensure the best possible throughput for all the projects that are in the organization. So humans only use 10% of the brain? I got a laugh out of that one. So yeah, this is definitely a myth here. So in fact, the reality is we use all of our brain. It wouldn't be there if we didn't need it. While not all of the brain is active all the time, you know, our brain is broken up into different areas that do different things. In any given day, doing various regular type of activities, virtually every part of your brain will be lit up at one point or another. Even when you're asleep, when nothing else is going on, you're using more than 10% of your brain. There's a lot of theories for where this came from. It's actually, there was a book that was written, I forgot the psychology person's name, but it wasn't Freud. I had it before I came here. I should have written it down. But anyway, back in the 70s, there was a book that was written that talked about how we think, and it wasn't necessarily meant from a neurological standpoint, but that there was concepts around the brain only being used at a 10% efficiency rate. And it really wasn't true then, and it's not true now. There are some things, if you look at the brain from a completely physical standpoint, only about 10% of our brain is made up of synapses, which is where all the electricity flows through. And the rest, the 90% of it, is made up of stuff that it is or what it's doing, but it's there doing something. So if you look at it that way, then maybe you can make the argument, but the reality is we don't really have a lot of spare processing power in our brains that we're not using. So DevOps is all about tool automation, right? No, it's not. In fact, DevOps is really about cultural change. Automation is an important part of DevOps. Everybody knows that you want to automate everything that you can. There's no question about that. But it's not your tool sets that are going to cause your DevOps programs to fail. It's more about the people and the cultural change that goes along with that. McKinsey had a study that says 70% of transformation projects fail, and of those, 30% are due to management behavior not supporting the change, fail due to employee resistance to change. And the reality of anybody that's starting off their DevOps program and looking to try to get their culture to change in the organization is that you're gonna come up against resistance. And there's a few different types of resistance that you'll find in the environment when you try to make these types of changes. It doesn't happen overnight, first of all, but you also need to understand the stakeholders and the type of people that you're going to run across. You're going to find a few people that are really positive and actively support the change that you're trying to accomplish. And those are your champions. And you want to get to know who those people are and get them on your side quickly and get them evangelizing the change as quickly as possible. On the other end of the spectrum, you're going to have people that actively are opposing your change. And they don't believe the concept of DevOps. They don't believe that this could ever work for this organization because we're different than everybody else. And they actively try to detract from your project getting off the ground. Those two sides of the spectrum are relatively few in number. You're not going to find a lot of people on either side of that spectrum. The majority of the people are going to be in the middle. And the middle is made up of two different halves. Can be passive supportive. That means they like the idea, but they're not going to do anything to help the change. They'll say, well, you tell me what to do and I'll do it. I think it's a great idea, but I'm not going to go out of my way to make it happen. And then there's also the other ones that are not really completely convinced, right? They're passive in a sense, but they're not supportive either, right? So there's the passive supporters and the passive detractors. And those passive detractors are pretty much the ones that you have to worry about. If it's somebody that actively opposes your project, they're easy to identify, and they're really pretty easy. They're the ones that are saying these urban legends that I've been talking about. it's pretty easy to cut them off at the pass because you have the facts, you have the studies, and you can really stop the argument in its tracks. But when you have somebody that's passively trying to subvert your efforts, you don't know who they are. They aren't really very vocal about it, but they're the people that are out there saying, well, I'll wait this out. This is just another flash in the pan. It's happened before. I'm going to sit here and wait it out. I'm not going to do what they tell me to do because I know it's not going to work. And those are the people that are the hardest to try to convince to come over to your side. But the reality is you can convince people by doing a lot of things, more than anything, just by being successful at what it is we're trying to do. But there are a couple of tools that you can use to help get the word out, get people excited about what you're doing, and ultimately get them over to your side, including communications plans, right? So having an effective communication effort is critical. Just not everybody understands what you're talking about when you say DevOps. Not really everybody understands, that these legends are urban legends, that they're not true. That hand in hand, it goes with education. So having the right tools at the right time is important, but people need to know how to use those tools. They need to know how to use those processes and how to change their work habits to work within those processes. And an education campaign will help to do that. And then finally, identifying activities that drive engagement. Get people excited about not what we're doing, but why we're doing it. And those activities could be anything. They could be, group events where you're trying to just get people to know each other. We at G3 have a simulation event that helps drive that type of engagement. Anything that really is outside of the normal type of education, that's more experiential, that can get people excited about, like I said, not just what we're doing, but why we're doing it and how it will benefit them in the end. Those are the types of things that you want to look for to drive that engagement. So I think this is pretty much my last slide. So the point I wanted to bring home here is that it's not always about the technology. It's not always about understanding what we're doing, but it's oftentimes the most important part of it is driving the workforce, the engagement to get people on your side, to help that cultural change along the way. When we look at technology is easy. It's ones and zeros. It's either on or it's off. But when we're working with people, that's where the struggle comes in, because people they're not binary, right? And it's not always easy to even understand where people are coming from. So looking for that personal engagement, that driving the adoption, that cultural change would help with any one of these myths that we talked about and will help your DevOps program succeed. So I'll leave you with this. We have this handbook that's available if you're interested in downloading it. It has a lot of the things that help people understand why it's important to do DevOps. If you're starting down your journey in a DevOps environment, this can help you answer some of the questions that you might not be used to answering. It's free. It's available on our website, and you're certainly welcome to go download that at any time. So that's it. That's me. That was my presentation. So if there are any other questions, please feel free to throw them at me right now. I don't know if it's just me, but I'm really hot right now. Yeah, that's what I figured it was. So what do you guys, any questions about what we talked about? Any comments about your DevOps programs, how you've driven the engagement?
Don't you think it's the very nature of agile methodology to have different, like that's what the point of agile is, that they're supposed to, the team is supposed to, at least coming from originally a small, medium-sized business, where the big mantra was that the team decide what tools and what processes they're going to use.
Right.
And not some overarching ITIL like best practice. And so everyone has to do this to meet whatever goal or need they require.
Yeah, that's absolutely the case for Agile. And the reality is that there are, like I said, there's different speeds of moving traffic that you need to account for. But the problem comes into play is when you come into an operations environment that's not used to that doesn't understand that, and they have one idea of what change management is. And it's not the idea to get rid of change management. I don't think anybody here really can argue the fact that change management is important, because it is. Change management is a process that really protects the business from IT. It's there for a reason. But understanding what that reason is, and really the spirit of the law, rather than the letter of the law is where you start that conversation. And the conversation can go along the lines of, I understand we're trying to do things to protect our business from any number of things that could happen. But let me prove to you that what I'm doing has no way to impact production. And here's the reason why. Here's the automated testing that we're doing. Here's all the hoops that we jump through. This is our production-like environment that we stage in, and it's exactly like it is in production, and it's tested in that production-like environment to the point that it's exactly what we will see in production. So we've proven that it can't cause an outage. And as long as you have that conversation and you work out a way to work within that process rather than circumventing it, that's the goal. That's what we want to try to achieve. Does that make sense? Yeah. Yeah. Feel free.
You guys do a lot of system calculations, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the biggest risks we talked about in the last slide there is those massive load blockers.
Mm-hmm.
You ever find that our mantra here is that the reason this DevOps innovation is happening at Gartner is because we have buy-in from the very highest level. This is what we're going to do, and this is important. This initiative, is important.
Mm-hmm.
For the success of the company.
Right.
Do you ever find that you have like stakeholders that have you come in and instigate this change, but then they're not doing 100%?
Paying it lip service? Yeah. It happens a lot more than you realize. So it depends on where the change came from. Sometimes IT leadership reads about this new concept, or somebody is talking in their ear, some consultant somewhere is saying, right. It's I always refer to it as the airplane model, right? So it's the backseat pocket in front of you. They pull out the American Way magazine, and there's always some technology article in there, or CIO magazine or whatever. It's like, that's it. This is going to solve our problems. And when they come at it from that perspective, they don't understand it. And there's a lot of education that needs to happen at that level to make it an effective transformational change. Some organizations that we've been invited to, it's started at a grassroots effort. Both ways, you still have talking about leadership change and leadership understanding. And it is absolutely critical to have that leadership understanding. Otherwise, it will be a flash in the pan, because there's not always a lot of immediate return on investment, especially in a DevOps environment. It takes some time for you even to get an understanding of what DevOps means for our organization. To get that return on investment takes a little bit of time. And sometimes, unfortunately, at that level, in that rare air that they breathe, they don't have those time frames unless they fully understand it, because they get pressure from all over. And as long as they understand it and they fully believe it, then that's where you can get a great transformation. But even if you're only at the grassroots, at the lower level, I've worked with organizations that it started off with one person that bought into the agile environment, the methodologies, bought into the DevOps concepts, and wrote a white paper for an organization and got it to her boss, and they started to spread it around in leadership, and invited her to come talk to some of the leadership and really get people to understand it and believe it. And from that one person, it's a very large organization that everybody would know their logo. They started this DevOps transformation, and it's been a very successful transformation. Yeah.
One of the things I'm seeing is an impediment is a lack of the ability to separate between IT infrastructure and application rules. I came from a company that had it all fused together. Releases and infrastructure. Change to a switch, or adding another storage unit to the virtualization environment was in the same cap. Traditional change processes could make a lot more sense when you look at the infrastructure part.
Mm-hmm.
And so by breaking them into two different views, I think cloud changes that, right?
Mm-hmm. It does.
That whole part kind of goes away, but it's not necessary. You can say, what if operations, the infrastructure side of it was just like cloud, right? They give us windows when we can't deploy, but other than that, it's not the business.
Right.
The team's responsible for the product uptime, not the people who manage the networks and the storage units.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're obviously part of the request, but they're not part of software release necessarily.
So you would say that the ultimate goal of DevOps is make dev the ops.
Yeah, right, right.
I'm all about one team,
Mhm.
you know, and that's why it's kind of we got a DevOps team, and since that's the danger of that is another side,
Mhm.
right? Now you got a DevOps side,
Right.
right? And so the goal of what we want to do is to leverage what we know about, you know, things like Chef or Puppet or Team City or Octopus and these various technologies, and the processes of getting those good teams where they can manage it themselves, right? In other words, after it's there, that they're managing the bill,
Mhm.
right? You know,
Right.
it is a work, we try to be more of a consultancy than
Yeah.
the, you know, the thing you have to go through.
The subject matter experts. Yeah. So to answer your original question, if that is a process that works for you and your ops people, then that's great. If you can come to a common understanding that says, for these types of applications, this is how we're going to release into production. These are the steps that we're going to take. This is the proven path that we will do every single time because that's the way we know it works. That's the way we know it's been tested. That's the way we know it's not going to cause impact, right? As long as it's documented and it's followed and it's standardized, then that's great. But the problem is sometimes your change manager needs to be convinced of that. And it's not going in there saying, we're not going to do your process. We're going to do your process, but we're going to do it in a different way. And this is the way that works for us, and this is why it works, and this is how it's not going to cause impact. Because the change manager, his whole life is about avoiding impact, right? That's all he's focused on, and that's a lot of times all he's measured on. And if you can prove to him that there's no impact, he should be able to identify a way to work that into the process so that you're technically using the change management process that works for you, and everybody else is doing the other pathway that works for them.
Yeah, from that perspective, change is visibility, right?
Yeah.
They were all about, you know, they made the previous company out of that, any chance they could have, they had change.
Yeah.
Martin Luther King, that's a week and a half.
It's for a reason.
Changes.
It's for a reason, though. I mean, depending on the organization you're in and the studies that you look at, but upwards of 90%, 95%, and even higher for some companies of incidents are caused by change and directly linked back to a change. And I know, you know, back when fax machines were a thing, that was a piece of technology that never changed. It sat in the corner, it ran and ran and ran, and there was never change to it and never went down until eventually the power supply blew up or something happened but it never changed. It always stayed up. But we live in a dynamic environment and changes happen all the time. And when they're not done well, they cause outages. Right.
So have you ever had any company or organization tell you that now that DevOps is out and we're trying to implement DevOps, we're going to get rid of ITIL or get rid of Agile and you know,
Yeah.
start?
It's funny. I had a few more slides in here that I took out just for time's sake. But one of the slides on here, what the myth is that ITIL is dead. And it really is a myth because there's room for ITIL out there. There's organizations that are brand new to ITIL today that are adopting it today, and they work with my organization. We do that. And in addition to that, there's a lot of organizations that are well down their path of DevOps or Agile, and there's still ITIL. There's reasons for it, and there's change management is one example. There's reasons to protect people from an infrastructure standpoint that ITIL is very good at. But the difference is we need to figure out how to blur those lines when we start to include DevOps or Agile into that bigger picture.
You see ITIL in cloud-only companies.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because there's a lot of process about managing your suppliers. And when you're in a cloud-only environment, there's a lot of, if you can't manage it yourself, you can't manage somebody else doing it for you. And that's a lot of times people get in trouble that way.
That service focus,
Mhm.
you know, this is the service contract,
Mhm.
you know, is a good part of ITIL. I don't
Yep.
think that much.
It doesn't. Yeah. Okay, anybody else? No? All right, well, that's me then. Thanks, everybody, for attending. I appreciate it.
Thank you.